said today, our webinar is on farm assessments for individuals with disabilities. I am the program manager here at Texas AgrAbility. My name is Mackenzie Thomas. I also have Dr. Cheryl Grimwald joining us today, and she is our program director and disability specialist, and I'll let her introduce herself as well. But I started with AgrAbility when I was still in college. I had a car accident when I was 18. I came from an agriculture background, lived in a rural area. We had cattle and hay and, showed and all those things growing up. And then I had a car accident when I was 18 and was in a wheelchair for almost 6 years, I believe. So I had to kind of learn how to navigate the world a little differently and kind of open my eyes to kind of the barriers that people with disabilities face, especially being in agriculture or wanting to do something outside and being productive. And so that's kind of what brought me to AgrAbility. And I continued after college. I did an internship with AgrAbility in college and continued after that to get into a program coordinator position. So it's something that's I don't only do for a job, but I really enjoy doing. It's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart because it's something I've dealt with personally a little bit too. So that's just a little bit about me. Cheryl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Cheryl Greenwald. I'm an associate professor for Texas A&M AgriLife. I am like Mackenzie said, the disability specialist on the project. My professional background and PhD are is related to transition for individuals with disabilities, birth to death. And then my personal background, I was raised on farms and ranches all over the United States, and then also had my own cattle business. So working with AgrAbility really fit well with the skills that I currently have. And I also do a lot with the project on coordination with Texas Workforce Commission folks and their vocational rehab.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. And we'll get into that a little bit as we go. And Cheryl, you can kind of chime in too in some of that with the contracts and VR and those kind of things. So
Okay.
thank you, ma'am. And we will go ahead and get to the meat and potatoes. So today we're going to be kind of covering services that are available through Texas AgrAbility for farmers and ranchers with disabilities, including farm assessments, and then looking at which individuals might be a good fit for a farm or ranch assessment. I'm looking at the process of actually conducting those agriculture worksite farm ranch assessments, and then wrapping it up looking at what some assistive technology recommendations might look like from a farm ranch assessment, what the write-up might look like, and give you some kind of practical examples of what that looks like when it's complete. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're funded through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We have a grant. We're part of a national network of other AgrAbility projects. I know there's a few on today from other projects around the US, but if you're not in Texas and you are interested in what other AgrAbility services might be available, there are other projects throughout the US. And so, like I said, we're partnered with a network of other projects, and we as a project partner with the Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living. They're a nonprofit partner, as well as the AgriSafe Network, and they kind of provide some health and safety related information and training to our project. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along as well. So here at Texas AgrAbility, we provide services to individuals with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and functional limitations in agriculture. And we'll kind of look at some examples of what that looks like. But to begin with, I just kind of want to see where our audience is from. I know from people that registered kind of what their backgrounds are, but for those of you who are attending, I have a little poll question. So it should pop up on your screen. If it doesn't pop up on your screen, it'll go in the chat box. And so it just asks, what is your occupation or background? And you can check any of those that apply. So if you're an individual with a disability, you're a caregiver, if you're a farmer rancher, if you're with folk rehab, an ag service provider like an extension agent, or someone from a disability services organization, um, just check the box that I guess most applies to you. And then I just kind of want to see where we're coming from. And then if none of those are you, just, I guess, don't respond, but you can put in the chat, what if none of those are a good fit, where are you coming from? So I'll give you all a few seconds to click those. It looks like a majority of you guys are individuals with disabilities and or farmer ranchers. There's a few caregivers and vocational rehab individuals on as well. So that really helps me to kind of look at, what your needs might be as someone in attendance today. So appreciate you guys for filling that out really quickly. It should still be in the chat if you want to respond, but that really helps us. I also want to say you can unmute yourself and ask questions. We do want this to be kind of an open conversation. If you have questions about something, you can unmute yourself. Don't feel bad about stopping me to ask a question. We will have time at the end for questions as well. You can also put any questions you have in the chat, and we will make sure to get to those at the end or when they come up. But feel free to ask questions as you go through. So now we're going to kind of talk about about Texas agriculture and why Texas AgrAbility exists and the need for it. So agriculture in Texas is the second largest industry, and it generates about $20 billion annually. And 98% of those operations are run by individuals or families. So you see a lot about corporate agriculture, and these big businesses are running all these farms, but a vast majority of the farms in Texas are run by individuals or families, which means that these are people that are operating these farms with them and their family members. The average age of a Texas farmer or rancher is 59. So that's a little higher than the average of your, say, normal workforce population, which means that comes with some age-related disabilities and health conditions. And we see a lot of those with our work as Texas AgrAbility. So also, oh, sorry, can y'all hear that? There's there's something playing in the background. Anyway, so
Yep.
with AgrAbility, we see a lot of secondary injuries and issues with the safety and those kind of things. So it's also preventing secondary injury for individuals that already have disabilities or have had chronic health conditions as well.
Well, and Mackenzie, like for instance, individuals who are farmers and ranchers, they're going to decide they're going to get things done. I think
Right.
about one we just did recently where he lost his left leg above the knee, and the way he gets in his tractor, he gets in it, really puts him at risk of falling. He isn't currently using his prosthetic for good reason, but he's also crossing over with his right leg to access the pedals. Anyway, there's some multiple safety issues involved, and what we want to do is get there as quickly as we can to support the non secondary injury issue. And then the way he twists in the seat to move his right leg over to access the controls on the tractor is an issue for hip and back. And so there's multiple reasons why AgrAbility is needed in those situations. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you. Yeah, and so we look at not only, what injuries are they at risk at of just because it's a farm or ranch, but also because they have this disability or health condition. Like she was saying, the individual he's using a walker currently, so it creates a lot of wear and tear on his shoulders and other parts of his body. So mitigating any secondary injury from overuse and those types of things are things that we look at as part of this assessment process. So some of the common disabilities that we see here at Texas AgrAbility are things like arthritis, joint injuries like back and knee injuries. Um, a lot of them are kind of traumatic accident related, may or may not be from, work on a farm. Like my example, I was just in a vehicle accident. It had nothing to do with agriculture, but that, caused my disability. But we also have a lot with chronic health conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, things like that. And as well as service connected disabilities from the military. So we serve about 70% of our Texas AgrAbility clients are military veterans. So there's a lot of military service connected disabilities that come with that. And those might look like PTSD or traumatic brain injury, a lot of joint and back injuries as well. But the injuries and disabilities we see with that population might look a little bit different than what we see with, say, an aging older farmer. So there's all types of disabilities and we kind of look at those, based on what that person's disability is, but there's a very wide range. So here at AgrAbility, we provide kind of one-on-one consultation with all of our clients. Looking at what their needs are, what their goals are, and seeing what we can do to help provide that for them. We connect them to other resources, whether that's their local extension office, the USDA resources, their Center for Independent Living, and also refer to some direct support services like vocational rehab. We have some kind of processes in place to do like an actual referral for their services. We provide farm and ranch assessments, which is what we're going to kind of get into more in depth today. And those include recommendations for assistive technology, modifying an individual's tasks, and like we talked about earlier, preventing any secondary injuries. Um, Here with AgrAbility 2, kind of like today, we provide education and training for service providers as well as for farmers and ranchers with disabilities. We have a lot of fact sheets and information that we get out to the public for individuals with disabilities that are in agriculture. So, can someone maybe unmute or put in the chat what they think a farmer ranch assessment is? Some of you have insider information, so you already know, but what would you think would be included in a farmer ranch assessment? Oh, I don't hear anyone. I guess y'all are being shy today, so I'll just go ahead and roll into it. So, for us, a farmer ranch assessment, what we do is we assess the person's individual goals of their farm, what they want, maybe with their time, based on their disability, and we look at all their disability and limitations that they have. We assess all the farm tasks that they do as part of being on their farm or ranch. We assess their work site, their equipment, um, any support they had available, and any risks and safety concerns. So, a farm assessment is really just assessing all of those things, looking at the person, what their needs, goals are, all the factors that play into that with their disability, their equipment, their work site, the terrain that they're a part of, as well as those people that are there to support them. So, we'll look a little bit more in depth about what that looks like. But who might be a good candidate for a farm assessment? So you think, okay, well, do I need a farm assessment? What can they provide me? So really, there's not, a lot of people are a good fit, but you do need somebody that has at least started farming or ranching or has property to start their farm or ranch. We have some people that contact us who are very beginner and they may not have property or have started farming yet. And for us to really see what their work site is like and what their tasks are. If they don't have an operation yet, it's really difficult for us to assess that. So while we can give them feedback and help through the one-on-one consultation part of the services we provide, for us to really be able to do a farm visit and farm assessment, it's best if they have property and have started farming on their property. It could be leased property. It doesn't have to be something the person owns. It could be, kind of just starting. But it needs to we need to have something to be able to look at so that we can kind of give them feedback and pointers. They also need to have a disability that limits their ability in some way. A lot of times, clients may think, well, I'm able to do all of the things that I need to do. It's just a little more difficult. But that's affecting their ability to do their work. So, if you have a disability on paper, but it doesn't affect anything you do on your farm or ranch, and you're not really looking for recommendations on how to make that easier, then a farm assessment may not be the right fit for you. But if you have a disability or an injury that is affecting the way that you operate your farm or the access you have to your equipment or your property, it might be a good fit. You also need to be open to recommendations. And we have some clients who call and want a farm visit, but when we go to assess, they're not open to any recommendations that we give. So then that assessment's not very helpful for them. So, you have to be kind of open to what our feedback and recommendations and be committed to working towards those goals. Because ultimately, we want the person to be able to, farm or ranch a little easier or make that more accessible for them. So if we provide those recommendations, and they're open to that, but they don't want to put in maybe time and effort to um, get funding for that or any of those things, then it's really hard for them to work towards that goal. So they need to be also committed to working toward their goals, their personal goals, the goals for their farm, for it to be successful. So who's eligible for a farm assessment? It doesn't have to be just the owner operator of that farmer ranch. Obviously, we do provide services to farmers and ranchers, but it can also be employees of farms and ranchers. It can be farm workers, family members of farmers. Like if you live on the property and you're helping, but you're maybe not the owner operator, those services are also available to you, as well as beginning farmers and ranchers. A lot of people think, well, I'm just starting, I have my property and I have a few things, but I'm not full time or I'm not, something like that. You don't have to be a full time farmer to access AgrAbility services for a farm assessment. Did anyone have any questions or anything so far? If you do, just leave them in the chat, but we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So, what are the steps to the farm and range assessment process? So, first off, to get this process going, you just have to contact us and become a client. We have a few forms you fill out, just telling us a little bit about yourself, about your farm, and your disability. Sometimes after that, we will refer to vocational rehab. Um, and that's kind of a process that we'll talk a little bit about in a minute, but they can help assist with this farm ranch assessment process. And so we can kind of assess if you need to be referred to vocational rehab and kind of get that ball rolling at that point. But at the point where we get to start doing the farm visit, we'll do a pre-assessment call where we kind of set up the date and what time we're going to be there to do your visit. And then we kind of go through with you and line out, like what equipment are you using. It's kind of like a pre-assessment interview where we'll talk through what your task kind of looking like. And this really just helps make sure we gather all of the information we need and we make the most efficient use of our time and your time when we go on site. We like to see all the things we need to see. We'll talk about seasonal tasks that you do so that we make sure we see things that maybe you aren't doing today, but you do in the wintertime, and things like that. And so we'll do a pre-assessment call. Then after that, we show up with our team on your farm to do the visit and the assessment, where we look at all of your tasks and things. And then it ends with a written farm assessment report. So you don't just get a nice little visit from us where we talk to you and take pictures and things. You actually get a full assessment report where we kind of recap everything that we discussed and information about your disability, how that might affect you. And then it has recommendations for either equipment that we would recommend to kind of make that your life easier. And we include links and quotes and all kinds of things with that report, but you actually do get a tangible document whenever this is over that you can take with you to kind of work off of. So, when we go do these farm assessments, we look at your farm tasks. So this includes, like for someone with livestock, we'll be looking at your feeding situation, how you water, are you building fences, are you having to haul livestock, what equipment are you using, do you have barns and facilities you're using, how are you operating and servicing your equipment. So we look at all types of farm tasks, seasonal tasks, how are you working your cattle, all of those things. And then like on a vegetable farm, it would include how are you planting, harvesting, spraying for weeds, how are you setting up your irrigation, how do you service your equipment, how are you selling, all of those types of things. So it's not just, what you're doing today, it's what do you do each season, and then also includes your work environment. So this is kind of where the secondary injury really comes in. What's the terrain look like? What is your proximity to the livestock that you're dealing with? What kind of work surfaces are you looking at? Whether that's, the where are you working, in a shop, are you working outside, what's the terrain look like, um, and then any exposure to like harmful chemicals, dust, those kind of things, looking at preventing any secondary injury there. And then what machinery and equipment you're working on or using on a regular basis. We also have to look at all of your different work environments, thinking about temperature, outdoor settings, seasonal settings, and those types of things. And then sometimes it's easy to forget this, but we also need to consider the related farm tasks. So while it's nice to get out and look at, your crop fields or what vegetables you're growing, we also need to assess how you're doing your marketing, how you're maintaining your records, how are you managing your tasks, how are you managing your stress, and the things that are related to agriculture and farming that are very present, bookkeeping, those types of things, especially somebody with like a traumatic brain injury or some kind of cognitive disability may struggle with. It's easy to overlook that, but those are things we assess during this farm assessment as well. So now that you kind of know what we're looking at as part of the assessment, who do you think the key players should be on these assessments? So when we go and do the farm visit, who should be there? Who should be a part of this? And you should be able to type it in the chat. You can also unmute yourself if you want to verbally say it. Awesome. So someone said the farmer, definitely. The farmer ranch owner. So that's right. If there's like an employee or a farm worker involved, they should not only should we be doing the assessment with the person with the disability, but also whoever owns or operates the farm, the primary person. Um, Someone said that any helpers that they have, and that's a great point. Any support they have, we see a lot of times that individuals with disabilities, if they say, oh, well, don't worry about maybe my spouse or my business partner, they might not be available that day, but they may have a different view of how those tasks are affecting that person, maybe what tasks they're not even able to do. That the support person's having to do because it's either not safe or they're just not able to do it because of their disability. So having those people involved is very important for making sure everybody's on the same page. We've had instances where we've talked to clients and they're like, okay, my goal is to get back on the tractor. I want you to help me do that. And then we get to the assessment and maybe their spouse is there or their business partner that they partner with on the farm is there. And they say, I don't think it's safe for them to get on the tractor. I don't really want them on the tractor anymore. And so if that's the person's spouse and they don't want them on the tractor, we have to, it would be not a great idea if those people weren't involved with this process because the safety of that person and um, all of those things is the most important thing. So we have to make sure that we have everyone there that's kind of a key player in this situation. So this is kind of who we bring and invite to our assessments to make sure all those key players are there. Obviously, we have the client, the farmer rancher is there, any caregivers or stakeholders. So what I mean by that is like if you have a business partner, if you have a spouse that helps out, if you have employees, kids, inviting those people. And there's been instances where we can't get them there that day, but we'll do an interview or like call them in just to make sure they know kind of what the process, what we're doing, what we're recommending, and they can give feedback on this process because it is important that those people be involved. Um, we also include an occupational therapist. So we have one that we contract with here, and they're there to help with looking at how the person's disability affects them, how any secondary injuries could exist, those types of things, safety issues around their disability. We also have an ag engineer that comes with us to look at like the mechanics of things and what's possible and kind of coming up with those kind of solutions. We have our disability specialists and team members here that come, as well as we invite any vocational rehabilitation counselors or specialists if they are a vocational rehab client, so that they can be involved with that process too. They're a big part of getting funding for equipment once it's recommended. So having them there at these assessments, I think, is very important for the success of those cases. So we partner with Texas Workforce Commission's vocational rehab to provide these farm assessments as well as some other services. So Cheryl, do you want to kind of touch on this kind of contract fee for service agreement we have with VR?
Sure. Sure. We have a contract. Oop, I'm frozen, so I'm not sure I'll stay on. It's been doing that all morning. I'll turn my camera off. We have a contract with Texas Workforce. Their vocational rehab. It's a partnership. We for funding, essentially they fund what we do. The grant that we have doesn't have funding in it available for funding equipment. We are in the process of also putting together a lending type, what would you call it, Mackenzie? A lending library. It's
Yeah.
a lending source where folks could possibly check out some equipment some large equipment in certain ways and try it out to see if it'll work. But the funding for a lot of our recommendations comes from Texas Workforce. If they don't want to work with Texas Workforce, we have gotten a commitment from FSA to do low interest loans out of their one of their funding sources for the assistive technology that we recommend. Or we've also worked with schools, either collegiate level or at the high school level, and engineers for the capstone students. For instance, West Texas A&M capstone students from their engineering department have built a lift for an individual for their tractor. And so we try to help the individual themselves put together a good plan for the funding of the assistive technology that we recommend. And then TWC supports us to provide farm assessments all over the state. And then also business planning support. We have an individual who is now a CB-TAC. I think Mackenzie can explain a little bit more what that is. Becomes a vendor of VR, will reside under us, who is actually educated in business planning, particularly for agriculture, and he supports the business planning for individuals if it's needed. Does anybody have any questions concerning that? Mackenzie?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, but you're real echoey.
Okay. Is this better?
Much better.
Okay.
I don't see. I've got some new messages. Brenda asks, when can we get started?
Yeah.
So,
Brenda, I'll share my email at the end of the presentation. You can just email me, and we'll kind of start that one-on-one consultation process where we can figure out kind of what stage you're at, what your needs are, and then go from there. But this is a process that can look a little different if you are not working through vocational rehab, but we are going to kind of talk about what the vocational rehab process looks like, because it's kind of the most formalized for these farm assessments that we have. So it includes the full-on assessment write-up, a comprehensive evaluation of their disability and the tasks that they're doing, and then addresses each of those kind of barriers with either recommendations for modifying their tasks or equipment that could help mitigate any issues that they're having. And each of those is justified based on the person's disability or health condition, and is provided in a write-up. So we'll kind of look at an example of that. And I do want to leave time at the end for questions and kind of looking through what a write-up would be. So here's an example of one we did recently. I hope that my internet doesn't cut out. I'm in a rural area, so you never know. But hopefully y'all can see and hear everything okay. But this is a real life example of assessment that we've done recently, to show you kind of what this looks like in practice. So to begin with, I'm sorry, this looks a little, coloring is off, but we have kind of a conversation with the person when we show up at their house to talk about kind of what their goals are, what they're looking for as part of this assessment. And this is where we kind of include all of those key players. It's good to have it kind of in more relaxed setting, like on the porch, just talking, get to know everybody. And so we kind of start out with that, and then we'll move into assessing the person's property, and what their equipment is. We go around and take a look at their equipment, have them show us kind of how they get around, we may ask them to kind of demonstrate some tasks that they do, or actually like, okay, well, when you go feed, what does that look like? And let's look at where you're feeding. Let's look at where you're storing your feed. Can you show me one thing that we commonly get people to, obviously I'm not following them around and making them do every task that they do in a day, but if they're having trouble getting into and out of their tractor, show me what that looks like. Can you get in and get out? And these are things that we have, our disability specialist is there. We have an occupational therapist there, as well as the ag engineer. And so they're able to kind of see what barriers they're having, what the routines are, and all of those things. So we'll look at, actually look at you doing the routine possibly, or getting into and out of tractors on equipment, looking at where your feed is stored, all of those things. We also look at all the equipment you use, whether that's equipment you're using today or you use once a year. We assess all the equipment, look at how you're accessing the equipment, what risks might be involved with operating the equipment, any issues you're having with the equipment, and how we can help mitigate that. As well as any work areas. So barns, shops, storage facilities where you store your feed, how you use your tools, how you work on your equipment. If you don't have a shop, how are you working on your equipment? Where do you do that? How are you storing your tools and implements, and all of those things, as well as any working areas that may not be, maybe around your property. So like cattle working facilities, pens, what that looks like, what the terrain looks like. As you can see, like there was a lot of rain when we did this assessment. So their working facilities were wet, and it's not obviously always that wet, but we could see what this looks like when there is rain. How do they navigate around their working areas?
Mackenzie, and
Sure.
some of the things that, when you think assistive technology, you might think something like a tractor lift or hand control. Some of the things that we recommend might be a new chute if it looks a cattle chute, and if it looks, which I believe we might have for this individual, if it looks like it's unsafe and it doesn't allow the individual what they need to operate in their area, and we are able to justify equipment such as maybe a new cattle chute or bump gates or solar powered gates and those kinds of things. Even those are typical, what would you say, equipment that individuals use. They're a piece of assistive technology for the individual based on what their disability is.
Right. And so those are all, and that's kind of what we talked about too with, having it be a barrier that's related to their disability. There's, a lot of things that would be nice to have just on a farm. Everybody would like to have a hydraulic squeeze chute, but we really have to look at how does that address issue they're having, either safety wise or with access to their property or whatever, based on their disability. So there's, we could have the perfect farm package and just recommend that to everybody who has, say, a cattle operation, but we really tailor the recommendations to the person and what their needs are and what their barriers are, and we justify each item, or task modification based on their disability. So it's not just like, okay, well, we would recommend everybody to have, a better working facilities and better automatic gate openers. If they're not having any issues getting in and out of their property or opening their gates, we don't recommend those things. So it really is based on the individual and what their needs are and what their barriers are. And each of those things is justified, based on that disability or health condition in the assessment write-up. And so as part of the assessment too, when we go on site, we discuss what those solutions might be. We're not just, taking notes and looking at everything, even though that is a big part of it, we're saying, okay, well, here's a solution that exists for this issue you're having. What do you think about that? We might, like in this instance, we brought this individual is having trouble connecting implements to their tractor, and so we had a little PTO connect, quick connect that we were given as a way to demonstrate how these work to our clients. And so we brought it with us and showed them how it would work, and let them actually try to use it and see if they thought that would be helpful before we go back and put it in the recommendation. And then they say, I don't know, how does that work? I would like to see that in person. If we have access to something to show them, whether that's a video of how it works. We really try to discuss those possible solutions with them there and kind of see how they think that would work and if that would work well for them. And if not, why wouldn't it work well, and kind of come up with some of the solutions on site before we go back to, our desks and write everything up. So what do you get as at the end? What is you go on this farm visit and we assess everything and, discuss all these solutions, but what are the results that you get? So you get a written report that includes task modifications. So for an individual that has, a back injury, it might be raising their work surfaces, including, ways to ergonomically um, lift and bend. And so there's a task modification section of that, as well as assistive technology recommendations. So any equipment that we would recommend, or modifications to equipment they already have, is included with justification of their disability in each of those recommendations for each piece of equipment. And we also have the client kind of prioritize this in a list so that they can see, okay, if I could only be funded for one thing, what would the most important thing be? And so they kind of prioritize this list with us, so that we can see and they can see what is most important, what's most beneficial to them. So before we get into like what the assessment really looks like, I'm going to show you guys an example from this farmer who had an amputation and was, having difficulty getting into and out of his equipment around his property, and then, his ability to work his livestock and those kind of things. But I'll open it up for any questions you guys have before we kind of get into that. All right. Well, I don't hear any questions. We'll have time at the end as well, but
They
I
might
do want
not
to.
realize that they're all muted.
Oh, yeah, you're all muted. You should be able to unmute yourself, but also you can ask it in the chat. Um, you can just type out a response and then we'll make sure to answer those as well.
How long do the farm calls typically take?
Awesome question. So, what we normally do, obviously, whenever an individual becomes a client, there's a series of like conversations over the phone that we have with them. The initial call where we just kind of figure out what's going on and how we might be able to help, whether that includes a farm assessment or not, is normally about an hour. We block off an hour. It doesn't always last that long. Sometimes it's a little longer. But we typically give about an hour for that, where we're just kind of talking through what their goals are, and then kind of what our plan is for helping them meet those goals. If that includes a farm assessment, when we do kind of the pre-assessment call, I would say it's probably an hour, maybe hour and a half, because we really ask them lots of questions about, okay, how are you feeding? How are you watering? How are you accessing your property? Because we want to make sure when we go, we see all the things we need to see. It gives them time to think through the process of how they do things. It's easy to forget steps that they do or take because, it's something they do in the winter and it's summer. So we really talked through like seasonal tasks, all of those things to make sure that when we're on site, we're seeing all the equipment we need to see, we're seeing all the work sites we need to see. Sometimes you drive up to a property and you see their barn by the house, but then they didn't mention that there's cattle working pens in the back corner. And so that's really time for us to kind of make sure we get all the information we need. But it takes, I would say, about an hour and a half for those conversations. And it's really for us to just be more efficient and make sure we get everything we need when we're there doing the actual visit. The visits take, I would say, between 2 and 4 hours to do like the on site portion. We take lots of pictures and videos. Sometimes if the occupational therapist is not able to be there in person, they will like FaceTime in. And so there's a part of that that's involved with them maybe demonstrating range of motion, things like that as part of like the occupational therapist's assessment. Um, but those visits, the farm visit part, the assessment on site will take a few hours. And then we try to get this recommendation report back to the person within a couple weeks. And if it's a vocational rehab client, that's something that the counselors and all of that are involved in. That's a
And
great question.
that's true. It's 2 to 3 hours usually on site, depending on the size. But we go all over the state. So we might have had to fly, for instance, to Amarillo. And so if we fly, then it's a day traveling and then a day doing the assessment and traveling home. So depending on where they're located in the state.
And we do, do these all over the state. There are some opportunities in the future if you are not, if an individual chooses not to use vocational rehab so that they don't have support for us to travel. Really the benefit of utilizing voc rehab besides funding their equipment is having support for us to be able to travel on site wherever you are. So if it's somebody in El Paso or the Panhandle, it's support for our travel included to those places. But we do have some kind of mechanisms for conducting assessments with some of our partners. And so while it may not be like our official staff there, we have some methods for people that we're partnered with in the area to gather the information and then us kind of collaborate on those recommendations. So just because a person it's not convenient for us to do an on-site visit if they're not a vocational rehab client or, are not eligible for their services doesn't mean that they're necessarily not eligible for a farm assessment.
And that's true. And we have done some virtual type
Right.
assessments as well. So um,
We can try to get creative and helping
yep, we
people
can get
get some
creative if we can't
recommendations.
actually get on site.
If y'all have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the chat or unmute yourself. I do want to show you what the farm assessment report looks like so you could see what recommendations might look like for an actual client. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
So this is what the assessment report looks like. This was an example from an individual that had a leg amputation, and so they were having trouble getting into and out of all their equipment, getting around their property, feeding their cattle, those kind of things. So it starts out just a cover page with who all is involved, and then talks about the person's operation. So where it's at, what they do, what kind of cattle they have, how they sell it, just a little bit about, the property and their agriculture operation as a whole, what their employment goal is, and then it gets into their disability and limitations. This normally includes a very vast write-up about their disability, how that affects them, and that's provided by our occupational therapist, and how any barriers they have to their occupation or their employment on their farm. It also has a section included for any task modification. So like for this example, use ergonomically correct techniques for physically demanding tasks that might include ergonomic lifting techniques. So like, lifting with your legs instead of your back, and we would include a diagram of how to do that, raising work surfaces, those types of things. So any task modifications that we see, we include in this assessment write-up.
Mackenzie, we also provide some low-tech kind of stuff that the
Right.
producer can take advantage of, either task modification or low cost things, like grips for tools to make them, like if somebody has arthritis in their hands, grips for the tools to make the handles easier to take advantage of, or gloves to reduce vibration of the, which are things that the individual could purchase themselves.
Right. And so we have like a section for, equipment recommendations that we would refer to vocational rehab for support for whatever reason. And then we'll have a section for things that we think that the client may be able to provide or have built themselves. And so like for this individual, an all-terrain wheelchair would be very beneficial because of their amputation and their ability to get around their property, the different types of terrain. And so we include what the item is, about how much it cost, a description about it, what all is included in that piece of equipment, any options that we would recommend that don't maybe come standard on them, like for this example, having a rear utility rack so that they could haul feed or small items with them around the farm. We include justification for how this removes that mobility barrier for them, and this is provided by our occupational therapist. And that is for each piece of equipment or recommendation we make. We have a justification there. As well as vendors where you can purchase this equipment. A lot of times we provide a quote for what the current pricing is on that and a contact person for who we got that from. So if they're like, well, that's a great piece of equipment, but I don't know, how do I find where to purchase that? That they have, a place, and, a lot of times even an individual person that they can contact to get more information. If it's something that can be purchased online, we include a link to it so that it's not difficult for them to find how to locate that item. So we do that for each piece of equipment we recommend. We'll include like a picture of what the existing equipment looks like. For this example, it's a platform lift for so that the individual can get up in their tractor without having to climb up the steps. And so we include pictures of, what the steps currently look like, and then what the recommended piece of equipment is, along with the same, kind of write up and justification. Obviously, I've taken a lot of information out of this one because I don't want identifying information in the example, but this is an actual example of a client and what, their recommendations might be. Like Cheryl talked about, the hydraulic squeeze chute. This is just like a head catch system. So that person is not able to get in and around his cattle when he's working them. This is a pretty old setup. And so having something that would better enable him to work his cattle, has some safety features included on that and isn't causing any extra strain to his body. But mostly it's a safety issue with working, those large animals, especially if he's trying to do that independently. And so we include, what the specifics are of each of those pieces of equipment, where to purchase them, and pictures. So, we include all of the pieces of equipment we recommend. Like this is a good example, how they're currently feeding, where feed is stored, and then what our recommendation would be, which is a automatic kind of bulk cattle feeder, so that they can see how that might mitigate that issue for them. But I do want to draw attention to kind of the modifications that a client could do, kind of the low cost part. a lot of times like hand controls or lower tech options, especially if it's something that has to be built custom, might be easier for the client to just have built themselves. And so our ag engineer provides sketches and information on how that should be built, and then is available for any questions. So if this ag producer, if the farmer rancher decides, hey, I want to go to my local, high school or manufacturing shop to have these hand controls built, they have something to kind of work off of and look at. And so those are also included in this assessment write-up, even though it's not something that's, purchased from a link from Amazon or something. So we include those as well as any photos that would kind of help support that and demonstrate how those things should be built, and any specifics of like what kind of metal it should be built out of, how to, manufacture it, those types of things. So did anyone have any questions about the assessment write-ups, kind of how we do it or why we do it?
One of the neat things about being able to do some of this low tech kind of stuff, this is removable that Mackenzie just showed you,
Mhm.
and it allows others to still be able to use the piece of equipment. It's removable to use in other pieces of equipment as well. And sometimes our VR cases, if they're working with VR, those VR cases can be open as long as 18 months to 2.5 years or longer in some cases, is it allows them to quickly and inexpensively take care of some of the issues that they have.
And it's also difficult for Voc Rehab to get an individual to build something and pay like a contractor to build something, inspect it. And so sometimes that process can really bog down the person's case, and they get kind of stuck on how to get a certified welder to build this thing. And so if it's not a big financial burden for the client to have this built, if they just have some scrap metal from a welding shop, this may cost, $50, $100, something like that to have built. And so, we include all the things that that person would need to have that, to be able to purchase it or do it themselves if they chose to. It also shows client buy-in whenever we submit this to VR, that the client is, inputting, some of the cost of it, and the, having some of this stuff done themselves. So we do kind of factor all of that in, especially if we're submitting this to vocational rehab, is including all the things that during our farm assessment that the person said, oh, I can take care of that. You don't have to ask vocational rehab or put that in the write up to them. I'll take care of getting the hand controls built. We still include that, and include it in the write up so that they can see what things the individual is going to be taking care of, and kind of their client buy in that process. Awesome. And I know Brenda said something about worried about the overall cost. If you can see on this person's write up, the total cost of all these pieces of equipment is about $55,000. This is what we would be going to vocational rehab to help support. And then if these options, like for example, this tractor platform lift, if that is something that VR decided they would not be able to purchase for this individual, we have partnered with, like Cheryl said, those colleges have helped kind of build these, or build them at a lower cost than $20,000. So we've, if it's something that is not, vocational rehab decides not to support, as we look at what other ways could you get that support. Is that a low interest farm loan? Is it, there's grants available out there for some of the lower cost equipment. And so we do work with clients on funding that outside of vocational rehab. It's just that if that's an option, and a person is eligible for vocational rehab, They can be a great supporter in funding assistive technology.